The fluorescent lights of the interrogation room buzzed with a persistent monotony, mirroring Aisha's hammering headache. Sweat clung to her like a second skin, despite the air conditioning's Arctic blast. She wasn't new to these rooms, the stale interrogation tactics, the good cop, bad cop routine. But this time, the stakes were terrifyingly high. Aisha, known on the streets as Whisper, had built a reputation for discretion. She wasn't a flashy kingpin, no gaudy jewelry or muscle by her side. She dealt in quality, priding herself on a network of loyal clients. But her luck had run out. A tip, a raid, and here she was, stripped down to a flimsy gown, a policewoman's steely gaze boring into her. "We know you were moving something big, Aisha." Detective Rana, a woman with a mane of iron-gray hair, stated flatly. Her voice was a monotone honed from years of extracting confessions. Aisha scoffed. "Moving what? Clothes? Maybe I should have opened a boutique instead." The bad cop, a burly officer named Khan, slammed his fist on the table. "Don't play coy with us. We found traces of heroin on you, enough for a light possession charge at best. But we know that's not all you're hiding." Aisha's heart hammered against her ribs. How? They hadn't found anything during the pat-down. Had someone snitched a specific location? Panic clawed at her throat. Rana leaned forward, her eyes narrowed. "We have reason to believe you've ingested the narcotics. Swallowing them, perhaps?" Aisha's stomach lurched. Swallowing? That was an amateur's trick, a desperate measure. She'd never... "You see the sweat, Khan? Classic sign of someone trying to push something through their system." Rana gestured towards Aisha's damp clothes. Aisha forced a laugh, a brittle sound that echoed in the sterile room. "Sweating because you're grilling me like a slab of meat, detective." Khan grabbed a chair and straddled it backwards, facing her. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way, Aisha. The easy way involves a trip to the hospital for an X-ray, maybe a CAT scan. The hard way involves a very uncomfortable cavity search." The threat hung heavy in the air. Aisha's mind raced. An X-ray wouldn't reveal anything. But a cavity search? Her carefully crafted plan, a last-ditch effort to save her operation, was on the verge of unraveling. Desperate, she blurted, all right. I swallowed them, okay? But it was just a few packets, I swear." Rana exchanged a triumphant look with Khan. They'd cracked her. The sterile white walls of the hospital room were a stark contrast to the interrogation room's harsh fluorescent lights. Aisha lay on a gurney, a cold dread pooling in her stomach. The doctor, a young woman with kind eyes, explained the ultrasound procedure. As the cool gel spread on her abdomen, Aisha squeezed her eyes shut. This wasn't supposed to happen. She'd meticulously planned, using a specially designed internal carrier, a desperate measure fueled by a ruthless competitor threatening her turf. The packets were small, undetectable during a pat-down, a gamble that now felt monumentally foolish. The doctor maneuvered the ultrasound probe, her expression unreadable on her masked face. The silence stretched, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of a nearby machine. Then, a frown creased the doctor's brow. "Detective Rana," she called out, her voice laced with concern. "I think you might want to see this." Rana materialized beside Aisha, her gaze flickering between the doctor and the screen. Aisha peeked, her breath catching in her throat. On the grainy black and white display, amidst the familiar shapes of organs, were several dark foreign objects. Dread morphed into a cold certainty. They were busted. Her network, her carefully built reputation, all crumbling down around her. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the stark image on the screen. Shame burned in her gut, a far more potent fire than the interrogation room's threats. She'd not only jeopardized her freedom, but also betrayed the trust of her clients, some of whom relied on her product for pain management. a truth she couldn't dare voice in this sterile environment. Back in the interrogation room, the air crackled with a different kind of tension. Gone were the theatrics, replaced by a grim efficiency. Rana laid out the Aisha's world, shrunk to the four walls of the interrogation room. Rana's words echoed in her head. Hospital. Surgery. Risk to the fetus. A fetus. A life she hadn't known existed, a consequence of a reckless night overshadowed by the all-consuming demands of the drug trade. Shame morphed into a raw, primal fear. This wasn't just about prison bars and shattered dreams anymore. It was about a tiny, fragile being whose future was now tethered to hers. A life she'd never considered, a life she wasn't sure she deserved a part in. Khan, the once boisterous officer, seemed subdued. The bravado had been replaced by a heavy silence, a silent acknowledgement of the gravity of the situation. Detective Rana, however, remained a force of nature. "We can try to get you the help you need, Aisha," Rana said, her voice surprisingly devoid of its usual bite. "But that depends on your cooperation. Tell us who you are working for, where you get your supply." Aisha hesitated. Snitching was a cardinal sin in the drug world, a guaranteed death sentence. But the thought of a scalpel slicing into her womb, endangering the life within, was a terror that eclipsed even that fear. "There's this guy," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "They call him Falcon. He operates out on the western side of town, near the old textile mills." Rana scribbled furiously in her notepad. "Good. Anything else?" Aisha spilled the details, the locations of stashes, names of distributors, all the information she'd so fiercely guarded. With each revelation, a sliver of hope flickered within her. Hope for a lighter sentence, for a chance to see this unexpected life through to its birth. The prison ward was a far cry from Aisha's meticulously decorated apartment. The sterile white walls were adorned with faded motivational posters, the air thick with the mingled sense of disinfectant and despair. Yet, amidst the harsh reality, there was a sliver of solace, a shared cell with another woman, Sarah, nearing the end of her own pregnancy. Sarah, unlike Aisha, was no hardened criminal. A single mother caught with a small amount of marijuana for pain relief, her story a stark reminder of the human cost of the drug trade. The two women, brought together by circumstance, formed an unlikely bond. Sarah, with her gentle touch and quiet strength, became Aisha's anchor. She listened without judgment, offering stolen moments of comfort and stolen cookies from the less-than-stellar prison fare. Aisha, in turn, shared stories from her life before the drugs, a life filled with dreams of becoming a fashion designer, a dream she'd buried beneath the weight of circumstance. Days bled into weeks, then months. Aisha's belly swelled, a constant reminder of the life growing within. The trial loomed, a dark cloud on the horizon. Rana, true to her word, had secured Aisha a plea bargain, a reduced sentence with mandatory rehab in exchange for her cooperation. The day of the trial arrived, a blur of legalities and tense goodbyes. Sarah, released a month prior, squeezed Aisha's hand, her eyes filled with a silent promise of waiting on the other side. Standing before the judge, Aisha felt a strange sense of calm. The fear hadn't vanished, but it was overshadowed by a newfound determination. The sentence was a harsh slap of reality. 5 years, the minimum for her crimes. But there was a flicker of hope. The judge, acknowledging her cooperation and the impending birth, allowed Aisha to serve her sentence at a specialized prison facility with a nursery program. The prison nursery was a cacophony of gurgles and coos, a stark contrast to the sterile silence of the ward. Aisha cradled her newborn son, a tiny bundle of wrinkled perfection in her arms. He was named Amir, a name that meant prince, a symbol of a new beginning. The first few months were a blur of sleepless nights, and a constant battle against the ever-present urge to use. But Sarah's letters, filled with updates on their children playing together outside the prison walls, and the feel of Amir's tiny hand wrapped around her finger kept her grounded. The rehab program was a lifeline. Aisha confronted the demons that had driven her to the drug trade, the emotional scars of a neglected childhood, the allure of easy money. Slowly, painfully, she began to heal. Years blurred into one another. Aisha excelled in the prison's tailoring program, her old dreams of fashion design resurfacing. She used her skills to mend worn clothes for the other inmates, her creations bringing a touch of color and individuality into their drab lives. Amir, a bright, inquisitive child, thrived in the nursery, his laughter a constant melody in the prison's harsh environment. The day of Aisha's release arrived, a bittersweet symphony of relief and apprehension. Stepping out of the prison gates, she blinked in the harsh sunlight, the world a kaleidoscope of forgotten sights and sounds. There, waiting for her, was Sarah, a smile crinkling the corners of her eyes. Beside her stood a young boy, fidgeting impatiently, a taller, older version of Amir. Aisha's heart ached with a love she hadn't known existed. She knelt, engulfing Amir in a fierce hug. He clung to her, his small voice thick with emotion. "You came back, Mama! You promised!" Tears welled in Aisha's eyes. She had come back, not just to him, but to a life she'd almost forfeited. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. The stigma of her past, the constant battle against addiction, loomed large. But this time, she wasn't alone. She had Sarah, a friend forged in the crucible of shared hardship. And most importantly, she had Amir, a constant reminder of the life she'd fought so hard to reclaim. The future stretched before her, an uncharted territory filled with uncertainty. But for the first time in a long time, Aisha felt a flicker of hope, a fragile ember of a dream of a new life, a life built on love, redemption, and the quiet hum of a sewing machine, stitching together not just clothes, but a future for herself and her son.
Please subscribe to my channel Lessons of Life and press the bell notification icon.